Would you still question me if you knew I owned the bank you work for? The first thing people noticed wasn't the way she dressed. It wasn't the quiet confidence in her walk. It was the number she wrote on the withdrawal slip. It was a Friday afternoon in Tallahassee, Florida, and the line at Sun Bay Financial stretched nearly to the glass doors. Phones in hands, earbuds in, eyes down. The usual end-of-week mood. But when Vanessa Drayton stepped up to teller window 3, the air seemed to shift without anyone realizing why. The young teller, Amanda Price, smiled politely at first. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" Vanessa returned the smile, sliding her withdrawal slip across the counter. "I'd like this in cash, please. Hundreds, if you have them." Amanda glanced at the paper, then at her computer screen. The number made her eyebrows twitch almost imperceptibly. $35,000. Not unheard of, but far from the daily norm. "Of course. One moment," Amanda said, typing Vanessa's account number. Her nails tapped against the keyboard, the rhythm slowing as her screen filled with account details. A small frown tugged at her lips. She tried again, just to be sure. "Ms. Drayton, I'm going to get my manager, all right?" Amanda's tone was polite, but there was a subtle edge there, a hesitation Vanessa had heard before. "That's fine," Vanessa replied calmly, her hands resting lightly on the counter. Gregory Shaw, the branch manager, emerged from his glass-walled office. Late 40s, tie slightly loosened, the look of a man juggling 10 problems at once. "Good afternoon. I'm Greg Shaw. Can I see some ID, please?" Vanessa handed over her driver's license and a sleek black card embossed with her business logo. "That's my corporate account. Everything's in order." Greg glanced at the ID, then at the computer screen. "I'm afraid I can't process this withdrawal right now. Your account's been temporarily flagged for unusual activity." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Unusual? I've withdrawn larger amounts than this before, all from this account." "It's just protocol, ma'am. We have to be careful with large sums. Sometimes these things happen if there's suspicious—" Greg stopped himself, softening his voice. "If there's activity we don't normally see." Behind them, a man in line shifted impatiently. Someone coughed. The quiet in the lobby was starting to feel heavier. Vanessa reached into her leather briefcase and produced a folder. Inside were her business registration documents, recent bank statements, and even her original account opening forms. She laid them out neatly on the counter. "I came prepared. There's nothing suspicious about me accessing my own money." Greg scanned the paperwork but didn't reach for the cash. Instead, he asked Amanda to print another verification report. As they waited, Vanessa could feel eyes on her. A woman near the coffee station whispered to the man beside her. An older gentleman stepped out of line to get a better view of what was happening. Vanessa kept her voice even. "Mr. Shaw, I don't appreciate being treated like a potential criminal for doing normal business." Greg exhaled slowly, his eyes flicking to Amanda's screen, then back to Vanessa. "I'm just following procedure. But until this flag is cleared, I can't give you that money." Vanessa studied him for a long second. There was no panic in her expression, only a kind of measured patience. The look of someone who had dealt with this kind of obstacle before. But what Greg didn't realize was that the person he was stonewalling had far more authority in this building than he could possibly imagine. To understand why Vanessa Drayton wasn't rattled by Greg's refusal, you have to know the kind of life she'd lived. She grew up in Mobile, Alabama, the youngest of 3, in a family that didn't believe in giving up. Her mother ran a small catering business out of their kitchen, and her father worked double shifts at the port. Vanessa learned early that if you wanted something, you worked for it, and you didn't wait for someone else's permission. By her mid-30s, she had built a property development company from the ground up. Not inherited, not handed over, built, with grit, long nights, and more than one risk that could have taken her under. And unlike a lot of business owners, she didn't keep her profits locked away in abstract investments she couldn't touch. She believed in liquidity, access, the ability to move when opportunity knocked. That's what brought her to Sun Bay Financial that Friday. She had a deal closing in 3 days, an old warehouse she planned to convert into commercial lofts. The seller preferred cash, and Vanessa was the type who liked to look someone in the eye when handing it over. It wasn't just business, it was respect. She'd started the morning at her office downtown. Her assistant, Brianna, had joked as Vanessa grabbed her briefcase. "You're walking out with that much cash? You better have security." "I've got security," Vanessa said, patting her own shoulder with a grin. Right here. The drive to the bank took less than 15 minutes. The weather was warm enough for the parking lot to shimmer and the kind of heat that made people move slower. She parked her black Tesla under the only bit of shade from a skinny palm tree and walked in. The moment she stepped through the glass doors, she could see the Friday rush. A man in construction boots with a deposit bag, 2 women in scrubs on their lunch break, a college kid arguing on the phone. Vanessa waited her turn, standing in line behind a woman with a baby on her hip. The teller line moved in that slow, steady rhythm banks have. Not fast enough for impatient customers, not slow enough to cause a real scene. When Amanda called her forward, Vanessa greeted her with that warm but businesslike smile she'd perfected over decades of negotiations. She'd been banking with Sunbay for over 10 years. She recognized some of the staff, some even knew her by name. That's why the shift in Amanda's demeanor caught her attention almost instantly. The smile fading, the eyes narrowing slightly at the screen, the hesitant reach for the phone to call the manager. Vanessa had seen that before, in airports, in high-end stores, even once at a hotel check-in desk. She'd been taught to keep calm, to let people talk themselves into realizing their mistake. But banks were different. Banks were supposed to be about numbers, not assumptions. Greg Shaw came over with the careful politeness of someone trained to de-escalate, but who still believed they were in control. He asked for her ID before even hearing the rest of the context. She gave it. He took it without looking at her directly. When he said the words unusual activity, she almost smiled. She'd had this exact conversation in another branch years ago, only that time the manager had the good sense to call corporate before embarrassing himself. But here, in this branch, Greg wasn't reaching for the phone. He was reaching for reasons. And the more paperwork she laid on the counter, the more he seemed to dig his heels in. Behind her, the line had slowed to a crawl. People were listening now, watching. That didn't bother Vanessa. Not yet. What bothered her was the way Greg's eyes lingered on the number on her withdrawal slip, as if $35,000 was an impossible sum for someone like her to request. But the longer he stalled, the closer Vanessa was to showing him just how wrong his assumptions really were. Greg's tone stayed polite, but there was a thin thread of caution running through it. The kind that made it sound like he was talking to a problem, not a person. "I just need to make sure everything checks out before I can release these funds," he said, glancing at the paperwork again without actually touching it. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her voice low enough that only he and Amanda could hear. "Mr. Shaw, that's my account, my signature, my ID, and my corporate documents. You've had every payment from me on time for over a decade. What exactly do you think is off here?" Greg hesitated. Sometimes large cash withdrawals are connected to fraud or money laundering. I'm not saying that's the case here, but Amanda's eyes darted between them. Vanessa caught the flicker of discomfort in her expression. This wasn't just a routine delay. Something about this felt personal, even if no one was saying it outright. From behind, a voice spoke up. "Is there a problem? Some of us have to get back to work." It came from a man in line, 40s, baseball cap, grocery store logo on his shirt. His tone was impatient, but Vanessa could feel the curiosity underneath. People love a scene when it isn't theirs. Greg didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he gestured to Amanda to run a secondary verification on the account. She clicked through screens, typing in codes that weren't part of normal transactions. Vanessa had been in enough boardrooms to read body language, and right now, Greg's stance was saying, "Stall her until we know more." "Secondary verification? What does that mean in plain English?" she asked. "It's just another layer of account protection," Greg replied, keeping his voice neutral. She tilted her head, studying him. "And how long does it take?" "Could be a few minutes, or longer, depending on what pops up." Amanda's keyboard clicks slowed, her eyes narrowing at whatever had appeared on her monitor. She swiveled it slightly toward Greg, who leaned in to read. He didn't say anything, but Vanessa caught the small sigh he let out. "What is it?" she asked. Greg straightened, tucking his hands into his pockets. "Your account was recently linked to a corporate transaction over the reporting threshold. That automatically triggers additional review. Until that's cleared, I can't—" Vanessa cut in, her tone firm. "That transaction was a property acquisition. It's right there in the documentation I handed you. You could confirm it with one call to your corporate office." Instead of making the call, Greg shifted his weight, glancing at the people watching. His voice dropped lower. "Ma'am, I understand this is frustrating, but—" "No," she interrupted. What's frustrating is being treated like my money isn't mine. I've been a client here longer than you've been branch manager." The man in the baseball cap muttered something under his breath. The woman by the coffee station took out her phone, angling it just enough that Vanessa suspected she was recording. Greg seemed to notice too, because his voice suddenly carried more than it needed to. "We have to follow compliance rules. If you'd like to take a seat, we can notify you once the hold is cleared." Vanessa smiled, but it wasn't the friendly kind. "No, I think I'll stand right here. That way everyone can hear when you tell me why I can't touch my own money." Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Greg's jaw worked as if he was weighing his next move, but Vanessa had already decided that the longer he dragged this out, the more satisfying the truth would be when it landed. The lobby had that strange kind of quiet where people pretended not to listen, but leaned just close enough to catch every word. Greg tried to keep his expression neutral. "Miss Drayton, I'm asking you to please step aside so we can handle this matter privately." Vanessa's tone was calm, but it carried. "No, I'll stay right here. I have nothing to hide, and neither should you." Amanda bit her lip, glancing at Greg, but he ignored her and started typing on the terminal himself. Vanessa could see the reflection of the screen in the glass partition, the cursor blinking next to a line of red text she couldn't quite read. "Tell me something, Mr. Shaw," she said, keeping her eyes locked on him. "If I were withdrawing this amount for a wedding, would we be having this conversation?" Greg hesitated. "It depends on the circumstances." "And if I were buying a luxury car or sending my kid to college?" "Again, it depends." Or, she interrupted, "is it only when someone like me asks for it that you decide it's suspicious?" A ripple went through the line. The older gentleman near the back leaned against the wall, watching closely now. Greg's voice dropped. "Ms. Drayton, that's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" "Because my paperwork's clean, my ID's valid, and my account balance could cover this withdrawal 10 times over." Amanda shifted from foot to foot. "Greg, maybe we should—" "No," he cut in quickly. "We're doing this by the book." Vanessa opened her briefcase again, sliding out a printed statement with her company's name, Drayton Holdings, LLC, right at the top. "Here's last quarter's earnings. 7 figures in deposits. I'm sure you'll find the source quite legitimate." Greg didn't reach for it. Instead, he crossed his arms. "Ma'am, compliance protocol is not negotiable. You may know your account is fine, but until the flag clears—" "That's where you're wrong," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady, but each word landed like a weight. "Compliance protocol isn't a shield for poor judgment." Amanda's eyes flickered between them like she was watching a tennis match she didn't want to be in. The woman with the phone finally spoke. "You know, I'm getting all this, just in case she needs proof later." Greg's eyes snapped to her. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to stop recording." "You can ask," she replied, "but I'm in a public place." Vanessa almost laughed. "Looks like I'm not the only one who thinks this is worth remembering." Greg took a slow breath, clearly realizing that the situation was slipping from his control. Still, he dug in. "Ms. Drayton, you can either wait in my office while we clear this, or you can come back another day." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "In fact, I'd like you to call the regional office right now. Tell them Vanessa Drayton is here. They'll clear your little flag faster than you can finish that sentence." Greg didn't move. Vanessa tilted her head. "You're hesitating. Why?" "Because," he finally admitted, "calling the regional office will bring in people above my pay grade, and they'll want to know why I didn't handle this myself." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you assumed I was here for anything other than legitimate business." Amanda's screen pinged with an incoming system message. She read it, then looked at Greg. "The hold, it's not a fraud alert. It's an ownership confirmation notice." Greg's brow furrowed. "Ownership confirmation? Of what?" Vanessa's smile widened, just slightly, but she wasn't going to hand him the answer yet. Not until everyone in that lobby was paying full attention. Greg leaned toward Amanda's screen, reading the notice again like maybe he'd misunderstood it the first time. "Ownership confirmation? That can't be right." Vanessa adjusted the strap of her briefcase and took a single step closer to the counter. "It's right, and it's about time you realized it." The people in line were openly watching now. The woman by the coffee station had stopped pretending to sip anything. Even the man in the baseball cap had taken his phone out, holding it low but angled toward the scene. Greg straightened, still unsure where this was going. "Ms. Drayton, if there's some kind of Misunderstanding? There's no misunderstanding, she said, cutting him off. Her tone wasn't angry. It was deliberate, almost like she was speaking in a boardroom. You keep saying you have to clear this transaction. What you don't seem to know is that I have the final say on transactions in this branch. Greg blinked. Excuse me? I'm the majority shareholder of Drayton Holdings, and Drayton Holdings is the controlling entity for Sunbay Financial's parent company. She let the words hang for a second. In other words, Mr. Shaw, I own this bank. The silence that followed felt heavy. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Amanda's jaw dropped slightly before she caught herself. Greg's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Amanda, who was still staring at Vanessa like she'd just walked out of a news headline. That's not... Greg started, then stopped. I wasn't aware... No, Vanessa said. You weren't. And maybe if you had been, you would have handled this conversation differently from the moment I walked in. The older gentleman in line let out a low whistle. Well, that explains a lot. Greg's ears were red now. He fumbled for his tie, straightening it as if that might help. Ms. Drayton, if I'd known... That's the point, she interrupted again. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Every customer deserves the benefit of professionalism, not suspicion. Amanda cleared her throat softly. Greg, should I, process the withdrawal? Yes, he said quickly, though his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. Yes, please do that immediately. Vanessa kept her eyes on him while Amanda began counting out stacks of hundreds. 35,000. Exactly as you requested, Amanda murmured. Greg tried for a smile. I hope we can put this behind us. Oh, we will, Vanessa said, sliding the cash into her briefcase without breaking eye contact. But not before we make sure this branch gets a reminder about the right way to treat customers. All customers. Someone near the door muttered, Wish I owned a bank, earning a quiet chuckle from a few others. Greg forced another smile. Understood. But Vanessa wasn't leaving yet. She had one more thing to say, and it was going to land harder than anything she'd said so far. Greg's posture had changed completely. The squared shoulders were gone, replaced by a slight forward lean, almost deferential now. His voice had lost its edge, replaced with something that bordered on apology, but couldn't quite reach it. Ms. Drayton, he began, I truly regret how this has played out. If I'd had the full context... Vanessa didn't let him finish. Full context doesn't change the fact that you looked at me, looked at the number on that slip, and decided something wasn't right. You didn't pick up the phone. You didn't ask clarifying questions. You went straight to delay and suspicion. The woman who had been recording nodded in agreement, even though no one had asked her opinion. Exactly. We all saw it. Greg's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Vanessa. You're correct. I mishandled this. Mishandled is one word for it, she replied, her tone cool. In my world, we call that poor judgment. Amanda placed the last stack of hundreds on the counter, her movements careful, deliberate. She was clearly trying to avoid eye contact with either of them. That's all 35,000, Ms. Drayton. Vanessa slid the cash into her briefcase and snapped it shut, then rested her hands lightly on the counter. Greg, I'm not here to humiliate you, but I do want to make sure something changes after today. If you treat me this way, what happens when someone without my resources or my title walks in? What happens when it's someone who can't make a call to the board in 10 seconds? Greg swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I understand. I'll make sure the staff gets a refresher on. No, she said firmly. You'll make sure the culture changes. Procedures are important, but so is knowing when to apply them with common sense. The man in the baseball cap finally spoke again. Yeah, and maybe don't make people feel like criminals when they're just here for their money. Greg nodded, clearly aware that the audience wasn't on his side. Message received, he said. I'll also make a formal note to corporate that this situation was handled inappropriately. Inappropriately is also one word for it, Vanessa said, her gaze steady. But I'll take that as a start. Amanda cleared her throat softly. Miss Drayton, would you like a security escort to your car? Just given the amount you're carrying? Vanessa's tone softened, just slightly. I appreciate that. Yes, I'll take it. Greg, perhaps seeing a small opportunity to regain dignity, gestured toward one of the bank's security guards. a tall man in his late 50s who had been leaning quietly against the wall the entire time. "Frank, would you mind walking Miss Drayton out?" Frank stepped forward with a polite nod. "Of course, ma'am." Vanessa gathered her briefcase, then looked back at Greg. "I'll be expecting a follow-up email from you within a week, not a template apology, your own words." Greg nodded quickly. "You'll have it." She gave him one last look, not cruel, not smug, just final, before turning toward the door. The people in line stepped aside for her, some offering small smiles, others just watching her go. Frank held the door open, and the warm Florida air rushed in. But, as she stepped outside, Vanessa knew this wasn't over. Not for Greg, and not for the way this branch would handle its customers from now on. Frank walked with Vanessa across the parking lot, scanning the area like a man who'd done this more times than he could count. The late afternoon heat pressed down, and the shimmer of sunlight off windshields made the air look like it was moving. When they reached her Tesla, Frank opened the driver's side door. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Could have gone another way real fast." Vanessa placed the briefcase in the passenger seat. "It's not the first time I've had to stand my ground, but it's still disappointing when you expect better from people in positions of trust." Frank nodded, his voice low. "Truth is, most folks don't push back. They get embarrassed, walk out, and don't come back. But that doesn't change the way they were treated." "That's exactly the problem," Vanessa said, leaning against the car for a moment. "Policies are supposed to protect people, not be used as shields for bias." Frank gave a small smile. "I've seen my share of both kinds. The ones who follow the rules to help, and the ones who follow them to hide." Vanessa glanced back toward the glass doors. Through them, she could see Greg pacing in his office while Amanda served another customer. The energy inside looked different now, tighter, like everyone knew a line had been crossed. She took a deep breath. "I'm not interested in punishing him for the sake of it, but I am interested in making sure he thinks twice before letting his assumptions lead the way again." Frank straightened. "With the way you left it, I'd say he's already thinking about it." She thanked him, slipped into the driver's seat, and started the car. The quiet hum of the engine was almost a relief after the tension inside. As she pulled onto the road, her mind wandered back to her mother's words when she was a teenager. "People will see you before they hear you. Sometimes they'll decide who you are without letting you speak. That's when you speak louder." Vanessa had spent her life speaking louder, not by yelling, but by making herself undeniable. Her success, her reputation, her composure, all of it was proof that she could stand in any room and be heard. But she knew not everyone had the same armor she did. Some people would have walked away from that counter today, frustrated but powerless to do more. And that thought sat heavier with her than Greg's behavior. She made a decision then. At the next board meeting, she'd push for additional customer service training across all branches. Training that didn't just focus on fraud prevention, but on how to apply policy without making people feel singled out. She also decided Greg's follow-up email would determine how she approached his future in the company. A genuine apology paired with action? He could grow from this. A hollow, scripted note? That would be a different conversation entirely. By the time she reached the downtown office again, the sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the street. Brianna looked up from her desk as Vanessa walked in. "How'd it go?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Let's just say the bank will remember today as much as I will." Brianna grinned. "Should I even ask?" "Not yet," Vanessa said, heading toward her office. "But I'll tell you this. Respect isn't optional. And sometimes you have to remind people of that." But what she didn't know yet was that the video from the woman in the bank had already started making its way online. And by morning, the story wouldn't just be Greg's lesson to learn. By sunrise the next morning, Vanessa's phone lit up with messages. Some were from friends who had seen the video, others were from business colleagues, even a few board members, all saying the same thing. "Saw what happened. Standing with you." She watched the clip once. The woman by the coffee station had captured almost everything. Greg's initial refusal, the tense back and forth, and the moment Vanessa said she owned the bank. The comments section beneath the reposted video was already filled with people sharing their own stories of being treated like they didn't belong in places where they had every right to be. It wasn't the kind of attention Vanessa sought out, but she knew its value. Sometimes, the lesson reached further when others could see it happen in real time. At the office later that morning, she took a few minutes to jot down notes for the upcoming board meeting. At the top of the page, she wrote 3 words: respect is policy. She planned to make it clear that customer service wasn't just about transactions. It was about trust. And trust was built or broken in moments exactly like the one in that bank. When Greg's email arrived that afternoon, it was short, but it was his own words. He admitted his assumptions, acknowledged the damage they caused, and outlined 3 immediate changes he was implementing in his branch. Vanessa read it twice, then forwarded it to the board with a single line. This is a start. She knew the conversation wasn't over. Not for Greg, not for Sunbay Financial, and not for anyone who'd ever been on the receiving end of doubt they didn't earn. But she also knew this. The moment you let an unfair assumption slide, you make room for it to happen again. As she closed her laptop for the day, Vanessa thought of something her father used to tell her when she was young. The real power isn't in proving people wrong, it's in changing what they believe is possible. She smiled, knowing that this was one of those moments where both could happen at once. If you take anything from Vanessa's story, let it be this. Whether you run a business, manage a team, or simply interact with people in everyday life, treat every person in front of you with the same dignity you'd give if you knew their full story, because you never really know who you're talking to, or how much impact your words and actions might have. So, the next time you catch yourself making an assumption about someone, stop, ask, listen. Give them the respect they've already earned simply by standing in front of you. And if you've ever been in Vanessa's shoes, standing at a counter, being treated like you didn't belong, remember, you have the right to stand your ground. Your worth isn't up for debate. If this story resonated with you, share it. Someone you know might need the reminder that respect isn't just courtesy, it's a responsibility.